Right, it is 4 o'clock, so we're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you for all who are joining us today for this very exciting and timely webinar on blockchain and election security. I'm going to go ahead and introduce our moderator for this webinar, Kenneth Garofalo. He is the CEO of Block Relations. Ken, I'll let you go ahead and take it from here.
Thank you so much, Kirsten. And to begin, I just wanted to thank ATARC, the Advanced Technology Academic Research Center, for having us in this arena here today, allowing us to host this panel talk with some great insights from these industry experts. So thank you, Kirsten, and thank you to Tom as well. So as you guys know, it's been 2 full days since the election, and still we do not have a decided president. So this has by far been one of the most unique elections in history, and I'm really glad that we have all these panelists here today to discuss. So the topic for today will be the post-election analysis, reflection, discussion, and discovery with these industry experts specializing in electronic voting, blockchain development, and regulations. We're going to gain valuable insights from these panelists in regards to elections and the security surrounding the process. So to begin, I'm just going to briefly introduce the panelists one by one. And if you guys can just give me a little bit about your background and current projects that you're working on, just to introduce yourselves to the audience. So first we can start with Cecil John, CJ, the author of The Social Currency and CEO of virtualdeveloper.com. How are you doing today, CJ?
I'm doing very good. Thanks so much for having me. So as Ken said, I'm the CEO of virtualdeveloper.com. We're a Microsoft managed company. In terms of blockchain, I built a blockchain platform, which I promoted as the world's first blockchain-enabled digital workplace. Caught Microsoft's attention. They gave me a call and they invited me to become my company to be what is called a managed company status. I'm also the author of The Social Currency, which is kind of a blend between money and morality.
Excellent. Thank you so much, CJ. And next we have Jake Braun, who's the Executive Director at the University of Chicago's Cyber Policy Initiative and the CEO of Cambridge Global Advisors. How are you doing today, Jake?
I'm good. How are you?
Doing well. If you want to give us a little bit about your background and any projects you're currently working on.
Sure. As Executive Director of the Cyber Policy Initiative at University of Chicago, we set up a program this cycle to give pro bono cybersecurity support to state and local election offices to help enhance their in-house security, and have collected a bunch of data via Twitter and other areas to produce reports on different cyber attacks and other things that have happened this cycle. And I guess I'll shamelessly plug my book too, which is Democracy in Danger. It came out last year.
Thank you, Jake. And yes, this is definitely the time. Go ahead and plug away anything you guys want to promote here. So thank you, Jake. And next up, we have Nimit Sawhney, who is an entrepreneur and co-founder of Votes, a very important electronic voting application that utilizes the blockchain. So how are you doing today, Nimit?
Hi, Kenneth. Good, thanks. Thank you for having me here. I will quickly share a few screen slides. Might be easier to get the message. So as many of you know, Votes is the youngest elections company in the country. We are very mobility focused. And one of the pillars of our solution is the way we use the blockchain technology. So in terms of projects we've been involved in since 2018, we've been doing a whole bunch of government pilots. These are small elections with a controlled group of voters, primarily from the military, citizens living overseas, and more recently, voters with disabilities as well. And so far, 30 counties in 5 states have successfully piloted the solution. They're spread across the country, so just a small example. In addition, we've also been running elections for both the major political parties, especially this year, their conventions, internal voting as well. So across the board, on both sides of the spectrum as well. And with respect to the current election, we were very honored and was very humbled to be the first smartphone app-based election system to ever be used in the US federal elections. And two states, few counties in two states piloted the solution, and both of them had record turnout. So excited to share more about that as the canvas progresses and we're able to publicly release the information. But thank you for having us here.
Thank you very much, Nimit, for those insights, and exciting to hear that your company was one of the first to introduce smartphone voting this year for this election. So we'll get more into that later. So next up, we have Tom Mcdonough, who's the Neighborhood Business Manager at City of Boston Mayor's Office of Economic Development. How are you doing today, Tom?
I'm doing well, Ken. How are you?
Doing excellent, and happy to have you here. You're going to give us quite the perspective from the government side of things, right? From the local office side of things, and we definitely look forward to that.
Yeah, and my background is in government and politics, and for someone who's in government and politics, this is Super Bowl day. So you know, it's been fantastic, I think, from a political perspective, just to watch all this. And it's the first time in a while, I think, that I haven't been directly involved in one of these presidential campaigns. I have been a veteran of political campaigns throughout the local, state, and federal and international races over the years. And the difference between this election and all those other elections was that we have such a divisive atmosphere now. And it's due to a lot of different things, and COVID being one of them. And it's been a huge challenge for every facet of our society. And you were asking me to discuss mail-in voting, and I think mail-in voting this year has been it's been one of the things that we've needed to look at and needed to implement on a more wide scale. Just a wide scale, give me the word, Ken.
A wide-scale initiative, yeah. We definitely need to look more into the successes, the problems that occurred with mail-in voting, and we will get into that question in a little bit here. But you bring up a great point there, where this election is like none other that came before because of the divisiveness of the candidates, of the political parties, and of the situation with COVID-19. So truly a unique scenario, and we're happy to have you here with us, Tom.
Thanks. And
so next up.
This year's process, by the way, I think has been pretty successful.
Oh, excellent. And I'd like to hear more specifically why you believe it to be successful. We will get to those questions in just a bit here. So next up, we have Bill Rockwood, who is Deputy Legislative Director for Congressman Darren Soto out of Florida 09 at U.S. House of Representatives. How are you doing today, Bill?
Doing great. Well, first, Kenneth, thank you for having me. Block One, you all do great work, and looking forward to seeing the great work product you put out, and also ATARC, who does a fantastic job. Emerging tech and politics, it's definitely a slow burn. There's a huge educational front, but I'll save those remarks. As mentioned, I'm the Deputy Legislative Director for Congressman Darren Soto. He is co-chair of the Congressional Blockchain Caucus. And I'll add at this point that all views are my own and do not necessarily reflect those of my boss or the House of Representatives. And I'll leave the political commentary to other folks. I'm here trying to be the insider of what I've seen in blockchain and the political and policy dynamic. The Blockchain Caucus plays a huge part on the educational front. That's largely what the caucus's goal is. We stand at 25 bipartisan members. We do a lot of one-on-one 101s. We're trying to get the conversation beyond crypto and highlight the actual benefits and the use cases blockchain can have. That's why my boss is big on it and why myself, I handle a bucket of issues and actually have more of a financial background, but I see blockchain as a way to make the world a better place. It sounds cheesy, but I wholeheartedly believe it. And some of the things we're doing within our office, we passed the two bills out of the House, first two blockchain bills out of the House of Representatives about a month ago. We hope to get those introduced in the Senate. Long-term, our goals are to create some sort of federal coordination of blockchain efforts within the federal government. And I'll just tease, I heard one of my panelists mentioned use cases and pilot programs. That's sort of our specialty as an office. We've gotten 20 items in the past two budgets, highlighting different blockchain pilots and how a different government agency can use blockchain. So hopefully I can be a translator between the great technologists that we have here today and the policymakers who are catching up, but are still a little bit behind on these issues.
Awesome, and thank you very much for that, Bill. Glad to have you here. And last we have the renowned Frank Norgat, the founder of Electus.io, which is an electronic voting platform that utilizes the public blockchain of Tezos. How are you doing today, Frank?
Doing very good. I'd like to second what Bill was saying. So, thanks to Turk, thanks to Block One. Really looking forward to, I guess, a very timely debate on, hopefully discussion and hopefully a useful one. You mentioned me as the founder. I'm actually the co-founder of Electis, and I'd like to salute my co-founder Gilles Mantry, who's here tonight. We both of us have actually a very different background. Like to keep it short, so I co-founded a nonprofit in the US called Startup Weekend. We merged later with the Startup America initiative, and we did our best during 10 years to inspire I guess like more than 40,000 entrepreneurs in more than 160 countries. So I come more from the startup world, but one thing led to another. I met Gilles, Tom, he has more of a profile like yours because he spent like more than 10 years in politics and government. He was a special advisor to President Sarkozy, and I kind of like the idea of these worlds meeting each other, and that these discussions are happening to maximize innovation and serendipity. And so we co-founded together Electis. The website publicity is electis.io. We aim to learn by doing. What could the future of democracy look like? And so we tried to bring everybody around the table. So far, we've got one project that's Vote for University. We're sponsored by the Tezos Foundation. We have recruited so far more than 30 universities, on track to get more than 50 around the world. And we want to get kind of a mix of students, researchers, professors, NGOs, government and non-government organizations to experiment, just to run as many experiments as possible, to try as many things as possible in a kind of a safe environment, so you don't have to test that at a national election. And that's it. And we're also developing our own solution. It's open source, called Electis, and we're welcoming any the criteria I guess we have is we're looking for solutions that are open source, free, and of course we're a big cheerleader of decentralization, and also maybe we'll talk about it like semi-decentralization as a way in between. Oh, and my background is in computer sciences, you guys might have guessed. And I'm coming from Ukraine, so I apologize, it's a little dark out there. It's close to midnight, but again, really honored to be here and cannot wait to start this discussion.
Excellent. And thank you very much to all of these esteemed panelists. And I hope that the collaboration and networking is not just confined to this panel talk, but continues afterwards too. So a lot of opportunity here. I do want to remind quickly the audience that we will be doing a Q&A at the end of our panel talk. So if you guys have questions, feel free to put those in the chat now, and then we'll hit those as we wrap up our predetermined questions here. So again, I wanted to thank ATARC. If you guys need more information on ATARC, it can be found on atarc.org. And again, my company is Block Relations. Any more information on my company can be found on blockrelations.com. All right, guys, let's get into the exciting part of today's panel talk. These are the questions that we're going to get some insights from the panelists. So what I'll do first is I'll read the question, and then I will call on the panelists that I'd like some feedback from in regards to the specific question. If anyone has any commentary they want to add, feel free to interject. So first question, we know there are many downfalls, but what are the current downfalls, fraud risks, and areas of optimization opportunity within the current voting system. And CJ, if we could please have you take the stage here first.
Absolutely. So I'll give a little, scenario. So I did a mail-in ballot this year, but I misplaced it. So I had to go through the process of applying it, for it again online. Never actually received it, so I went in person to vote. I wasn't sure whether I actually mailed it out or not, so I went online, tried to find if I could track to see whether it had been received. I mean, I found it eventually, but that's kind of an arduous process. So I think that whole workflow of voting, being able to just vote from where you are, where you are with the secure hardware biometrically, mapped to your, to your credentials, you're going to get the provenance that the blockchain will provide, the proof of record, but also the proof of flow as well. So you can follow up and see that that you voted and the vote wasn't tampered with. So that's one of the areas of optimization which is very, very close to my heart.
Excellent, thank you for that. And Jake, could we get your commentary on this as well? Any kind of insights into downfalls, fraud risks, and areas of optimization opportunity with the current voting system?
Sure. So I think that the kind of most vulnerable points of the infrastructure, I think, are the kind of two bookends of the infrastructure. So one being the voter registration database that contains all the names and addresses and everything. And then secondly, the websites that display the election results, tell people where to vote, when to vote, all that type of stuff. The websites are vulnerable in virtue of the fact that they're websites, and it's nearly impossible to stop someone from hacking the website, at least a determined actor like a nation state. And so much havoc can be done with the registration databases, by deleting voters or changing around addresses, or any number of things that the voter registration databases do provide a very lucrative target for the attackers. Unfortunately, both of these aspects of the voting infrastructure are not that hard to get at. And we know that at least in the case of Russia in 2016, they actually did hack into the voter registration databases. We don't know what they did besides scan them. But the way they got in was by hacking the websites of the election officials and using a very simple SQL injection attack. And it turns out, like DHS, I think, just reported, maybe it was Monday or maybe it was Friday, that in fact this had happened again. They said Iran did the same thing, and another actor. But they didn't specify who it was. We presume it's Russia, but we don't know, because DHS hasn't said who it was. And so now we know that in the last two presidential elections, in fact, both the database and the websites have been attacked. And again, using this very simple SQL injection attack that honestly at DEF CON, so I'm the co-founder of the voting machine hacking village at DEF CON. And we had 10-year-old kids, 11-year-old kids, who were able to execute a SQL injection attack on a fake Secretary of State website that we made up with, I think, a half an hour of training. So certainly nation state hackers can and have executed these same types of attacks. Now, one thing that I think is interesting in terms of defense, and one thing that we actually helped an election official with, I can't say where because of NDAs and so on, but we did have an election official implement a blockchain instance on his voter registration database to better secure it leading up to the election. And so we think that's promising. Secondly, I think that we've got a real problem in the fact that the only people who seem to really get to see the election software that's used, that kind of knits together the results that are published on the websites, the data that's in the voter reg database, the machines that are programmed and so on, is the vendors and the bad guys. And I'm a huge advocate for open source voting software, of which I know there's many projects or many groups out there like kind of racing to be the first ones to build a usable one. But What we don't have is the good guys looking at the election software that's out there and trying to find holes and vulnerabilities so that they can be fixed. And, you know, I'd really like to see if we could get a bill passed, federal R&D dollars, maybe out of DHS S&T or NSF or DARPA or whoever, or maybe all three, to support the development of open source voting software, because that could really go a long way to solving a lot of the problems or at least, managing better the problems that I outlined there.
Yeah, that's some really valuable insights, and I think you are, precisely the right panelist to discuss these potential fraud risks, since you've already identified a few of them. So thank you for that. And Nimit, I was wondering if you could also weigh in on this topic.
Sure. Yeah, in addition to what Jake outlined, I think another aspect besides security, which gets frequently overlooked, is the accessibility aspect of it. There are a lot of voters around the country who can't hand mark a paper ballot. And so for them, it's hard to have an accessible interface to voting. And I think we need to look at that as well. That's one area where the current systems don't do an adequate job. And there are millions of voters like that who are impacted and frequently overlooked. So I would point that out as one. The other aspect, which I think is a significant issue, is a lack of standardization. I mean, we do have a very decentralized approach of running elections in the US, unlike most of the countries. So there are close to 4,000 plus jurisdictions around the country, and each of them pretty much, in the most cases, does elections their own way. We don't even have a common standard of designing ballots, and these are paper ballots. And so I think we need standardization. We need standardization of data formats, of how voter registration systems interact with the different components of the system. And so a lack of standards has led to a lot of problems which could be solved as well. So I'd point out those two things.
Excellent. And I know, Frank, you look like you wanted to have some input on this topic. Do you want to weigh in?
I think we can talk more maybe later on, but yeah, I agree. I do believe actually DARPA did finance, like if I'm correct, I believe that was Election Guard. I think they put some money into that, and but yeah, definitely that's going to be a big topic, I think, for today.
Yeah.
The standardization, this working. I mean, like we're spending. I don't know how much we spent on that election. On the organizing the election, I heard the 1.2 billion. I think just on organizing it. I mean, it seems interesting. I don't know how much of that is allocated towards building a better system, but I'm pretty much sure it's zero. So yeah, definitely something to be done there.
And I can actually add to that. I don't know the figures that were passed last year, but in this past House budget, an additional $450 million were allocated for election security. Unfortunately, the bill didn't make it over the finish line. It passed the House, but there is an appetite for funding in these R&D measures, but hopefully not too little too late.
Exactly. And in the interest of time, guys, let's just move to the next question here. So we'll start off with Bill on this. So I want you guys to discuss the mail-in voting that we saw happen this year and analyze the success of this year's process. We all know that there was a lot more mail-in voting due to the COVID-19 situation. So Bill, if you'd like to start with that. Yeah,
and I'm going to do the classic political move and reframe the question and answer the thing I want to answer, and just say we got to think of the positives first. That the highest voter turnout, highest mail-in ballots ever in history, and there is a study that if you vote mail-in, you are statistically much more likely in the future to do it again. So I think that is a positive track, and we have to also acknowledge that the pandemic fundamentally changed things. But all that said, we're here 3 days later, probably with some degree of anxiety. So I highlight the positives just to say we have some problems. And I'll just point to the confidence. I think people are working hard and, doing the right thing at the state and local level. But when you have a patchwork of regimes that, Nevada, for instance, is going to be processing ballots for another week or so. And I think that just leaves us all wanting something different. And I'll frame that in the positive because unfortunately politics and policymaking is a reactive process. Very, very few times are they in front of problems. So I think this does provide a perfect starting point for this conversation and why a conversation like this is a problem, because everyone's feeling that tension right now. And I really think that blockchain and some other solutions, they're not solutions in search of a problem. We have, this framework that's set up in the constitutional days, and we don't work through the Pony Express anymore. This isn't your Kennedy versus Nixon election. So we need to react accordingly and look to evolve into the future.
Couldn't agree more. And Tom, when you were introducing yourself, you said that you believe the mail-in voting was a huge success this year. So I want to find out why. Oh, I think you're just on mute there, Tom.
I am. I believe it was a huge success only because I think it guarantees that all votes will be counted. And there has been some problem in the past years with getting all the votes counted. And I think mail-in voting gives people the opportunity to get their vote in regardless of whatever else is going on. I mean, this year it's COVID, next year it will be something else. But it guarantees them the ability to get in their vote unhindered by anything but the Postal Service. So.
Exactly. That's a nice caveat. Anything but the Postal Service, right? Uninhibited. So, Frank, I'd actually like to hear your thoughts on this subject as well.
So I'm going to have to disagree with you, Tom, from personal experience, which is like, well, I was very proud to vote for the first time at this election, and being overseas, I had the chance to experience, first time the process. And I must say it's very confusing. Well, I guess I'm a special case because before I used to be in Puerto Rico, which is not a state, so I had to first of all figure out which state, but which ended up being New York, and then I had to figure out that each state had different rules. Some send you the ballot, some send you an invite to get a ballot. The way it works for New York is you have to ask for your absentee ballot, which I did by first printing a paper, then sending it, then following it on FedEx, then waiting, I don't know, maybe 3 weeks, 2 weeks. Then I got an email. And the email said, like, congratulations, Frank, but they misspelled my name. And after that, they said, here's the link, click here, put your email and your information, like Kings County and all these things, and then print your ballot. I was like, that's great. I'm just going to do that. And I tried every combination of name, first name, second name, mix them all. I've never been able to get the ballot. I tried to send an email to the Kings County Board of Election. I never got a response until I got a response later that says, hey, sorry, the window's over. So personally, I was like, I wished I could have voted from my phone, like, so by Nimit, like I would have loved to use votes or something similar. And I do believe you're right. It's a great success that 100 million people, I think, this year used the mailing ballot. But I'm also there, in a way, I mean, it looks like there's going to be a lot of debates about should we trust this election or not. And actually, I'm very excited by a very deep audit, which I'm sure is going to happen. And so we'll know, we're going to learn so much, and we'll see actually, how solid the system is. So I agree, it's a little sad and a little messy right now, but I guess the good side of it is we're stress testing this thing like never. And at the end of the day, like I do believe democracy is, it's like, in economy, you've got these behavioral economics. I kind of like to think of behavioral democracy. It's not because you have the best system in the world that it means people believe in it. And so I join you in thinking that actually it's a good thing that this thing is being stress tested to the max for, the next couple of weeks.
Can I just interject there, Ken?
Absolutely.
I think we need to get Frank together with me and help them to navigate the system and help them to better get your absentee ballot or your mail-in vote in. And
Would love to.
yeah, so we'll do that.
Thank you.
If I could add a couple of things. So I agree with the idea of, stress testing the system. And this was a special year. So I think election officials across the board did a great job in, helping conduct this election in a very uncertain time. So all kudos to them. But at the same time, I think we shouldn't overlook the vulnerabilities and the problems with mail voting. I can give you my personal example. I became a US citizen in 2015. So 2016 was the first time I voted. So I always liked the in-person voting experience because it's kind of novel. And this year I tried to vote by mail, and it was troubling because in the primaries, my ballot didn't make it. And we kept checking on the website, and then had to go file a provisional. And so I don't know if my ballot got counted. And then for this election, we got the mail ballot, but to my utter surprise, there was a single envelope. And so I had to sign my name and the signature on the front of the envelope. And typically when, mail voting is done properly, you have a double sleeve. So whoever opens the envelope can't really, see your ballot. In this case, it wasn't. And I'm sure that problem happened in multiple jurisdictions because states were doing the mail voting for the first time in a very hurried way. So I just want to say, while we need to salute the election officials, we shouldn't overlook the threats and problems with that system, because deep down, it's not a resilient system. Like if Florida has a hurricane or had a hurricane last week, there would be no postal system. And if you can't vote in person, how are you going to vote? Like, what are we going to do? What would we have done? Would we have postponed the election? And I think learning from what happened in Haiti in 2010, when after the earthquake, the mobile network was the first infrastructure which came back online. I think we need to do that kind of resiliency planning, which I feel like is really missing from our election infrastructure.
Yeah, that's some great feedback. It seems like there's really a need for a multitude of options here, right? You should have the electronic voting option, you should have the mail-in voting option, and you should have the physical voting option, right? It should be a combination of everything. That way, in case an unforeseen scenario appears, you have a method to work around that. So, all right, guys, in the interest of time, I'm just going to skip ahead to the next question here. I know we already touched a little bit on this, but I want to really drill down into this subject. So what federal or local level standards need to be introduced for electronic voting using blockchain technology to flourish? And I think we'll start with Jake on this one. Jake, if you could give us some insights on that. So what standards at a federal or local level need to be introduced for electronic voting using blockchain tech to flourish?
When you say electronic voting, do you mean like mobile voting?
Mobile voting, yes.
So, obviously that's a pretty controversial topic. I think there's certain aspects of mobile voting that happen already, right? So overseas military and others, they vote on over email, which is totally insecure and doesn't protect the secrecy of the ballot at all. And I know we at DEF CON actually were able to hack the email system or a mock-up of the email system that our military votes on in like 15 minutes. It was so ridiculous. And so, for those folks who are already voting, in these incredibly insecure ways, there should be a better option. I think, what Nimit's doing is very admirable and interesting. And obviously there's other groups out there, trying to build the best mousetrap, I guess, as they would say, better, faster, cheaper, or whatever. And I guess one of the key things that I think would need to happen is that there would at least be a paper printout of the ballot that the voter could verify one way or the other. Now that's still not 100% secure. There's still ways to hack that even, but at least there would be the paper backup. So I would, if I was king for a day and could write the bill, I would say that if we're going to do this, there should be a paper backup. Again, I think that the system that it's built on should be open source, so the good guys can look at the technology and not just the vendors and the bad guys, which is the only people who can look at it now. Obviously, we'd want to have the risk limiting audits, in place to be able to go back and audit the paper that comes out of the mobile voting. I think that's where I'd start. But others on this call, Nimit in particular, I think would probably have some other thoughts beyond that.
Yeah, that's a good segue. Nimit, if you want to weigh in on any standards that need to be proposed.
Absolutely. So if we look at our in-person voting infrastructure, there is a set of standards which are known as the Vvsg, Voluntary Voter System Guidelines. Those have been around for a few years, and parts of it are somewhat outdated. So at least as a first step, that could be a baseline for things which are relevant. Not everything which applies to in-person voting applies to remote voting, obviously. So there has been some work which has been done by the federal testing labs this year. And we were fortunate to be a part of that. In addition, we need to look at what's evolved in terms of technology. So we have the OWASP standards, which is sort of an open set of standards for all web-based technologies. From a security perspective, they have a mobile top 10 now. So I think looking at that, and then looking at some studies which FWAB did, the Department of Defense did a few years ago. I think those had some good learnings as well. So we have out there, bits and pieces, which if we were to combine those, we could come up with a, base set of standards which cover, usability, accessibility, security, as well as the voting rules, which need to match, the in-person voting experience. And I think we could start there. And then obviously security is top of mind. And on the security front, I think having a collaborative approach like Jake was alluding to, where, people collaborate from industry, academia, bug bounty programs, and also I'd say, collaboration between different industries, and having kind of standardization on the data formats, how we communicate with the voter registration system, how we communicate with the voters, if there are receipts involved, printing of paper ballots, etc. So I would do that as a baseline, because all that material's already available. We put it together, do kind of a version 1.0 draft. And then as we get feedback from the community, I'm sure people will provide some great feedback there. It can evolve into a more, advanced formal standard.
Right. It's collaboration, review, and reform. It's something that, the people in this panel here are definitely contributing to, and it's something our ATARC working group is discussing as well. So Bill, it looked like you had a little bit to add here.
Yeah. And agree largely with what my two prior panelists said, but I will, I'll issue a challenge that, or how I found success working through federal policy. And a lot of times it's hard because the conversation is occurring at multiple levels, where some of these things are really 10-year objectives and we need to get right with all the details, but that's not where a lot of our members of Congress and our policymakers are. So if nothing else, I'd just like to suggest for the folks in the industry is you have to you have to reverse the conversation. Engineers want to talk about the engineering first, but you probably only have, honestly, 2 or 3 members of Congress that'll understand anything what you're saying. So what I found to be successful is you have to start with the problem you're trying to solve. I think we all understand election security, and that's where the foreign interference came. So you literally have to connect it to something they care about. You don't lead with blockchain, you lead with the problem and suggest that there might be a blockchain layer to it. That's how, honestly, that's how the bills got passed, was we just did that with enough members to force it over the finish line. So that's my one piece of practical advice there. But my other piece of advice is just to think in different time frames. You know, I think Nimit and Jake were alluding to some of the nitty gritty that I would maybe put in a 10-year window bucket. You know, I think federal policy is painfully slow, and I'm more frustrated than anybody, but just somebody that navigates it. You got to crawl before you can walk. And so this is going to happen in an incremental process. I'd love, you know, a system where you can take your phone and vote tomorrow. But we have to get trust and confidence. So even deploying blockchain through these incremental steps, you know, we've seen in the past couple of days that, you know, all of a sudden 100,000 votes that weren't accounted for suddenly move. Like blockchain does supply chain really well, even if we're just tracking mail ballots. And also to speak of one of Jake's point, we are working on a federal funding initiative, and we're working on a bill. So I'm happy to listen to that. And I'll point to the success of something that West Virginia did. As Jake mentioned, the foreign deployed service members have a tough time voting. It's usually been done over email. West Virginia implemented a new system where they moved it to the blockchain, and they had over 400 people that successfully voted without incident. So if we just get down to the specific problems we're trying to solve, is it the security, is it the trackability? Like, I think there's a blockchain layer to each of it. And I think where we all can collaborate is, because our bill idea is just to federalize that program, do the same thing for all federal service members as just a way, bipartisan. I think you can get buy-in from both sides and then build that out to something more, you know, like a phone-based blockchain system. You know, I think that's the end goal, and we sort of have to reverse engineer the baby steps to get there. But something that Nimit mentioned really jumped out, that I think a panel, some sort of public-private academia collaboration, working group with feedback and all the sort. I think policymakers need to hear that, and it's just connecting the dots. So just minimum standards. I think we're going to need a federal it's called a federal floor. I think localities are going to have some flexibility, but you're going to have to set some federal minimum standards that if you're using a blockchain-based identification, what are the 5 components that fit the minimum standards for a valid identity? Like, that's a good starting point. And then you give the states the flexibility to enact more strict standards, but really the federal action here is to create some sort of minimum requirements. And then as we get more and more specific for that phone-based voting system, that's when we need the blue ribbon panel to really bring this in for a landing and get the details right.
Excellent. And I'm going to end that question on that commentary. That's really useful. So what I'm going to do here in the interest of time is I'm going to combine the next 2 questions. And we'll start with CJ on this. So number 1, why is there a need for blockchain in order to ensure election security? Number 2, how do we implement manage the solution?
Great question. Thanks for asking that. You know, in my book, The Social Currency, I mentioned that, you know, economists have traditionally been arguing over, you know, who controls the means of production, right? But I feel as though we as a community have missed it in terms of, you know, we being proactively involved with the government to control the means of exchange. And a thought that I've been kind of like planted a seed, you know, there's a base assumption that government is a de facto organization that should control the voting process. And I'd like to challenge that. I haven't actually thought it through. But if we're arriving at a stage where the community can collaborate with the government in managing the means of exchange of currency, why not the token for voting? Now, in terms of why we need a blockchain. Now, blockchain provides provenance, and it does it in a very, very good way. Proof of record, proof of process, proof of signature, right? But as a result, it also comes with a fantastic supporting infrastructure along every single plane that you can imagine. It spawned a set of new protocols like, DID auth, DID attestations, these decentralized identities. So the idea of being able to have an identity when you're not using the traditional challenge response, entering in a username and password, has been made available by blockchain. You also, of course, have the decentralized ledger, where it makes it more difficult for a hacker to cause mischief. We talk about denial of service attacks or SQL injection. You have to do it over X number of distributed nodes and not just one, right? You also have a new frameworks for actually creating the voting token, like Microsoft's token taxonomy initiative. It's beautiful. It could be a replacement for the ERC20 for currency tokens, but it's also a replacement for asset tokens and voting tokens. So we have this really, really rich infrastructure available now to create a really innovative, platform. So those are my thoughts.
That's excellent. And Jake, could I have a response from you in regards to this question? So why is blockchain needed to ensure election security, and how will we implement and manage the solution?
I think it's, like one piece of a solution. I don't think that it's a panacea by any stretch of the imagination. With the voter reg databases being, in my view, one of the highest value targets in the election infrastructure, it would seem that blockchain makes a lot of sense as a way to secure those. But again, there's other things that can be done as well. I mean, I think one of the more disconcerting things in my mind is just, if you've got 8,000 election jurisdictions around the country, I mean, many of them have their voter registration data managed at the state level, but even so, at the end of the day, they still wind up, the local counties and so on, wind up having to take, their parts of the data relevant for them and put it in their poll books or do whatever they're going to do with it, print out poll books and so on. And so it's, as you can imagine, with 8,000 jurisdictions, 98% of them do not have a cybersecurity person on staff who can secure these databases. And so I think the more that we can, get these databases, likely in a cloud somewhere where a company like Amazon or Google or Microsoft or whoever, does have the resources to hire the best cybersecurity people in the world to secure that data, and then they can use blockchain and a whole series of other technologies for security. I certainly wouldn't advocate putting all the voter reg databases in one cloud because that just centralizes it probably too much. But if they were to be spread among the major cloud providers, and then those folks could use the technology necessary to secure them, including blockchain, I think that would give us the best kind of footing with what's available to folks right now. I mean, the whole reason that our initiative started this pro bono cyber support for local election officials was specifically because we know that it will never be the case that they have the resources or even the personnel in most places. Even if they had the money, they wouldn't be able to find the people to hire to do cybersecurity in their offices, because nationally there's a 500,000 person shortage of cyber professionals to fill the existing open slots. Globally, it's like 3.5 million. And so, no offense to the folks in Kalamazoo, but the Kalamazoo City, county clerk is just never going to have somebody to do this,
Exactly. And thank you for the insights there. And Frank, could we get a response from you on this topic?
Sure. So the two parts, the first one, and something we didn't talk about, by the way, is I do believe what one of the foundation, and Bill, Tom, I don't know, you would translate that as a way for it to pass, but we do need digital ID is I think, an important foundation for this thing. It exists in Estonia, and to me, if you don't have a digital ID, any of these things is very difficult to build on. And so to me, that would be something that's needed. After that, for blockchain, I think Jake also mentioned before that, you know, these subjects are very touchy. Every time we talk, again, like with Electis, we can have this community you guys are talking about. So we have researchers, and it's very clear. I would say 80% of the time we talk about blockchain and election and researchers, 80% of the people say you don't understand the topic. And even worse, not worse, but I know a couple of brilliant MIT teachers who say they don't even like or think, and they have really, really good arguments, but electronic voting is a good thing. So to me, I don't think you need blockchain from a technical perspective. My argument is you need it because elections are about trust. And you could have the most safest, like mathematically backed, beautiful machine. And I'm going to take an extreme example, but let's say you're organizing an election between Israel and Palestine, and you have that server on one side of the border. People will not trust it. And I think one of the advantages of having blockchain is that people who don't trust each other can literally, you could have, we did an experiment with self-tallying, which is interesting. So people themselves can verify the vote. I agree with Jake also on the paper trail, which by the way is used in India, where there's more than 900 million people who vote. So there's like a mix of taking what exists today. And the second one, I think the distributed aspect is good too, because if you can have different part of that blockchain that are very different, then it's really hard to have one centralized attack. The same as it kind of mimic the fact that you have to physically go to, you know, to voting polls to change everything. If you can somehow build a distributed system where each node is slightly different in terms of encryption, then it makes it super hard, like to hack. About the how, I do believe in the bottom up. I do believe grassroots the right way. I do believe we need thousands and thousands of experiments where it's safe to fail, both safe politically and safe technically. University is what we believe is a good place to start. Maybe county, maybe type of elections, and so that would be my quick answer to your question.
Definitely some great insights. And if the technology is there to help decentralize the data, why not use it? And Bill, do you want to drive us home on this topic here?
Yeah, sure. And I agree with a lot of that. And I think it's important for when you're engaging with policy members is to say that blockchain is a possible solution. You know, you can't say that it's the only solution or it's one of many. I think sometimes you have to connect the dots that these are the things it can do, and just the way it works, it's, you know, cybersecurity and how to get siloed information to talk to each other well. You really got to emphasize the benefits and what it can fix, and that it's an option among many. And I will say that you have to do the other thing. And some, I won't say anyone on this panel, but I hear some blockchain advocates, it's the cure-all. It's going to solve everything. And, you know, some policymakers roll their eyes because they've heard these things that don't work in the past. So you have to go in and that's what I tell people, that the things blockchain can do and the way it works, it can help with very specific things, and it needs to be considered in that arsenal of tools. But you have to also acknowledge the things that might not do, and that's why it's a tool and not the be-all end-all for every aspect of this complicated issue.
Thank you so much, guys. And
I could add a
go ahead.
couple of things that I agree with what was shared. I think it's really important for everybody to understand that, as was said earlier, it's not a magic pill, the use of the blockchain. I think blockchain serves a specific purpose. And like Frank mentioned, theoretically, you could build the same functionality with a different kind of system. One system we've experimented with is, you know, GitHub, which is basically similar to a hash chain. And so theoretically, you could use Git to build a system which matches what the blockchain does. Whether you can scale it or not is a different challenge. That's where we ran into a bottleneck early on and decided, and I'd like to share a story which I think matches what Bill was trying to say. I remember my first pitch to an influential politician about using blockchain for elections. I was trying to explain to him what Bitcoin does and how Bitcoin nodes are spread around the world. And the moment I mentioned a couple of countries which host the Bitcoin nodes, he literally fell off his chair. He says, that's never going to work. So you're telling me you're going to run elections on nodes which are run in unfriendly parts of the world. How do you expect me to sell that to the population? And it really hit home hard. And we were glad we heard that very early on. And so that was a reason why we picked a permissioned blockchain infrastructure rather than going with Bitcoin or Ethereum, because technology-wise is a different aspect, but whether you can sell it to the people, to the political decision makers, is actually a much bigger problem. And so I agree with what Bill was trying to say completely.
Yeah, I think it's pretty understandable that there's a huge educational hurdle at the start here when communicating with local politicians and whatnot from an engineering standpoint. So with the time left here, I'd like to dive into the audience questions. And this, Tom, I would like you to address this question here from Heidi Benach. And her question is, we have automated in every other industry with technology, automation, et cetera. Why do you think we have not a more automated, streamlined technological election process as well, where your vote can be tracked no matter what, whether mail-in or in person? So why do you think it hasn't advanced as much as other industries?
Well, I think because you see that that machines and that type of thing, they're not infallible. And I think, like was said here earlier, a machine with paper backup is a good solution, because then you can legitimize the system and legitimize the vote. So I think that no matter what, I think there needs to be a public-private partnership with public accountability, an accountability factor, which the public part would bring in, and then like a consultant that comes in to help with the technical aspects. So
I couldn't agree more. And that's half the reason why we started the company Block Relations, is to be that intermediary between the two parties. And so I think you hit on a very good point there. If anyone else wants to weigh in, I'll have one more audience question here before we end. So if anyone wants to weigh in on that question, feel free now.
And I'll just add that it is a little tricky to weigh in on election issues, because it's the one policy issue that is inherently political. You literally can't separate political outcomes from elections. So I think you can make an argument of every other policy issue, but certain things, like there were more Democrats that used mail-in voting this election as compared to historically Republicans have tended to use more. So it's important to acknowledge that some people are going to be bad actors and try to, fudge the results and put their finger on the scale one way or the other, just because a solution might skew one way or another. But I think we have to just, fight the good fight and realize that it's a trust and procedural issue that we need to lock in. And it's not necessarily outcome determinative. We want to build the better system that people trust. It's not that we're implementing this to predetermine certain outcomes.
Yeah.
Well said. Well said. And so a question here from Brian Lemonster. Do you think we're at a tipping point where new systems, including blockchain and other emerging tech, will be embraced? If not, what do you think will be that tipping point? And this is open for the floor here.
Maybe a quick point of view on that I've got personally, which is always wonder what would have, George Washington, Madison, Jefferson would have done if they created the United States today. And I do believe, the tipping point is not now, which everything that's happening in today's election, where, we wish we could have the results right away in the, in the 21st century, in a country where we were talking about going to Mars. To me, I'm sure we're not alone thinking like why I cannot vote from the comfort of my home. So if this is not the tipping point, I do believe what will be is the people. And the people can self-organize. And what would happen if 100 million people don't go through the government and use some public blockchain to elect someone? And I don't want to go with secession, but yeah, at one point, if the government wouldn't do it, the people would. Almost like, you know, like Uber would disrupt things. I do believe that at one point people they start to do that, right? I mean, you go on Facebook and you can create your own mini political rally. You don't have to go through anything official. So I do believe if now is not the tipping point, like I guess in a very American spirit, the people will make it happen.
And I'm talking a lot, sorry. I deal with the policy at the federal level a lot. And I will say that I don't think we're at the tipping point yet, but COVID has accelerated the conversation by several years. And kind of our plan and why we focus on the budget is to get these different pilot programs within different agencies that utilize blockchains to do different things. I think the one that's furthest along is the Food and Drug Administration using blockchain to track contaminated food back to its local source so that you don't have a romaine lettuce outbreak like occurred a few years ago. And I think our idea is whenever this tipping point happens, we want to have a track record of government success of these public-private partnerships and use cases and pilot programs to show that it's not just us trying to fix the election. It's us trying to, you know, I think that tipping point's in a few years, and we just need to build a credible record of blockchain being used in different things so that we have the credibility to say, oh yeah, it could also help with elections as well.
Yeah, I would agree. As much as I would like to say we are at the tipping point, I don't think we are there yet. I think it's at best one election cycle away. So perhaps 2024. And I totally agree with Bill. I think we have to get there in baby steps. We need to keep doing pilots, build the proof points. The FDA example is great. And I think we'll have some really good proof points from this year's elections as well. And I do feel like you might find an international jurisdiction take that leap of faith before a major leap of faith happens in the US. And I think that would be telling as well. And the big reason for that is, actually there are two reasons. One, Frank pointed out, is the lack of a national digital ID infrastructure. The reason Estonia is able to do secure online voting in the presence of, you know, one of the biggest nation state threat actors is because they have this, they very early on put this biometric national ID in the hands of every citizen. And I think in the US, that work is being done by the private sector, unfortunately, because it's all at the state level. And if everybody had a passport, for example, we could solve that problem tomorrow, but only a third of the country does. So that's something to keep in mind. And also the very decentralized nature of the election operation here, which is very unique compared to every other country around the world which conducts a democratic process. So there's room for optimism, but I don't think we can jump the gun yet to say that the tipping point is here. It's probably close, but not yet.
Can I just jump in there, Ken? I think on the world, in the world arena, I think there might be a lot of skepticism about starting on the world stage, only because of world politics and the distrust of many many different nations with other nations, and those people, people dealing with people, and it's a debate that we're going through in this country right now, with structural racism and that type of thing. So I think that could create part of the problem. But
absolutely, there's so many different complexities we're dealing with, especially in a person-to-person business like politics, right? So I just want to end this meeting here today by thanking all of the panelists for joining me And thanking ATARC again, it's atarc.org for more information. And my company is Block Relations, and you can find more information on us on blockrelations.com. Maybe this is a good time if we just go panelist by panelist, give a closing statement and an address or social handle where people can follow up with you if they need more information. So Bill, if you'd like to start.
Yeah, and I have to correct my introduction. It's Block Relations and not Block One. There's a big difference. So thank you for what you do all. Feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn. My name is Bill Rockwood Jr. I respond well to there. And I just joined Twitter, Bill Rockwood, and then the number 2. But my concluding thoughts, exciting times. I hope everyone survives the remainder of the election season intact. But blockchain is honestly the thing that gets me excited and get out of bed every morning on the policies the front. We were hearing a lot of negative news, but for the technologists and the scientists and all the book writers out there, thank you for what you do. And, I hope I can be a bridge to the great work you're doing and helping it move at the federal government level.
Thank you, Bill. And Tom, if you want to give a closing statement and contact point.
Sure. Tom Mcdonough, and I can probably be best reached on LinkedIn. And it's under Tom Mcdonough, and I'm a neighborhood business manager with the City of Boston's Office of Small Business. And I just want to thank Ken and ATARC for inviting me here and allowing me to be on this panel, because frankly, I don't think I'm among the giants that I hear. I'm looking up at giants is what I'm doing. And so I appreciate the opportunity to be here. Thanks.
You're welcome, Tom. We definitely appreciate you being here as well. And CJ?
Yeah, sure. Thanks everyone for the opportunity. Really, really enjoyed it. I put my details in the chat window. So it's Seja for Twitter. There's my LinkedIn profile. You will need my email address because I'm very anti-spam. So you can't connect to me if you don't know my email address. But that's my website as well. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. And Frank?
Yeah, thanks to Block Relations. Thanks again, Kenneth, for putting this together with you, Kirsten, and the talk. Super honored to be here. I'm just very excited to work on things. And so my take, maybe, and tell me if I'm wrong, but I like the idea that we all agree we need experiments. We all agree we need to have, the political side, the research side, and everybody coming together. So practically on our side, I'd love for anyone who listen to us, if you can go on electives.io, and if you can connect us to any universities, we're conducting an experiment for the next 6 months, and we're looking to organize more than 50 elections. We do have some university in New York. We have NYU, we have Stanford. We'd love to have some in Boston. There's a couple of good ones. And so that's it. And so again, looking forward to continue this conversation with you guys and with anyone who's involved here today. And let's do our best. And I'm pretty optimistic about what's happening now. I do believe it's I think Tom mentioned that COVID is accelerating everything. I feel, or maybe you, Bill, did too. But at the end of the day, it's a little hurtful. But I think it's all for the best, and we'll make a better democracy at the end of the day. So super exciting about what's going to happen next.
Exactly. Thank you. And Jake?
Yeah, so thanks for having me. Obviously, you can find me on LinkedIn as well, like everybody else, and can check out the Cyber Policy Initiative at harris.uchicago.edu. Yeah, thanks for having me. I think what you guys are doing is great.
Thank you very much. And Nimit?
Thank you, Kenneth, and the Block Relations team, and also the ATAC team for having us here. It's a great honor. And I would like to end by saying that I think this is a really timely discussion. There's an element of inevitability to it, I think, as far as the future is concerned. And I think we need to stay optimistic, think about this in a very methodical way. Change does not happen overnight. And I think where there's a will, there's a way, and it only seems impossible till it's done. So I'm excited that there's a there's an audience of people who are optimistic about this and want to do this in a very methodical way, and excited to be part of a small part of this. So thank you again for having us here.
Thanks all around. All right, guys.
Hold on one second. I want to take a photo. So smile, 3, 2, 1. Thank you, guys. All right, everyone have a good rest of your day.
Thank you.
Bye.